Welcome, everybody. It's Michelle Price here with Startup Grind in Houston. I want to welcome you to our fireside chat today. I'm really excited that we have got Debbie Danon from the UK with us today. And we're going to be talking about difficult conversations, things that founders can learn how to do because everybody's going to expect them to be leading those. So just a tiny bit about who we are in case this is your first time ever listening to us. Startup Grind values are three simple things. We give first, we make friends, and we help others. And one of the things that you may notice is that our mission is we give startups everywhere the education and the opportunity to build, grow, and scale their companies. And our community here in Houston, as well as in Texas, is of startups, founders, innovators, creators, and of course, investors. Houston, we're specifically focusing on marginalized voices, which is different than most chapters around the world because we're in like 600 different cities. So there's a different voice for each one of us. And I would invite you to explore what are the voices of your local Startup Grind chapters? And then who are some voices that might be more supportive of the type of leadership that you're trying to run your business through? Now, Houston is an international city, and being one of the largest in the country, we have 2 international airports. We speak 145 languages here, and that really surprises most people because they still, even though we took it over a long time ago, forget that Houston's the most diverse city in the United States, not New York City. Sorry, y'all lost that to us a long time ago. And our goal is to be the chapter that bridges cities and countries because we're such an international city. And so whenever you want to know what's either going on here in Houston or what's going on in Hong Kong, Spain, Brazil, that's how we choose to set ourselves up to be supportive of you. So Debbie, would you please share with our listeners today a little bit about who you are and the value that you bring to your clients?
Hello, and thank you for having me, Michelle, and hello to everyone who's listening and watching. So yes, I'm here in London, UK. My name is Debbie Danon. I am first generation here in the UK. My parents are Turkish Jews who left Istanbul in the 70s. And I grew up here in London. I moved from south to north, which is very significant if you know. I guess I guess that's really a pertinent place to start, Michelle, because, and I love what you said about, having different voices than you usually hear come to the fore, because it was so formative for me living in broadly white, broadly Christian or atheist South London growing up. My parents wanted to be near the river. That's why they chose to live there rather than living near communities with people, I guess, similar to us. So from a very young age, I was explaining why I didn't celebrate Christmas, or explaining why, oh, do you speak Turkish or do you speak Jewish? Like, people were very confused between religions and languages and nationalities. So from a very young age, I kind of took on this kind of educator persona, I realized in later years. And I went on to study theology and religious studies. I was fascinated with the idea of how it is that people act from a sense of collectivism rather than from individualism, and religion is a really interesting frame to look at that, whether it's for what we might call for better or for worse, really, in terms of the ways in which people cause harm, but also achieve incredible good in the world as well. So I was super interested in that, and I ended up talking about difficult conversations, or conversations that are generally cast as difficult. My first role was growing a startup NGO from 5 of us to 20 of us, leading interfaith conversations in the school system in the UK, and then in businesses as well. So looking at faith is still very fringe in diversity, equity, and inclusion now, and we didn't have a field of DEI in the same way as it's evolved now at that time in the corporate space, or at least it wasn't as expansive as it is now. And what we were trying to do was to kind of combat a lot of stereotypes and prejudices that were emerging among young people, but also among teachers, right? It wasn't simply about young people. It was really about particularly in a post 9/11 and post 7/7, which was the bombings in London, there was a huge amount of Islamophobia, particularly against Muslim women, because of their visibility and their, perceived vulnerability. They were attacked much more than Muslim men, the stats showed. And also, I had learned my whole life about anti-Semitism, but what I really saw playing out was the things that I feared would happen to me as a Jewish person were happening to my Muslim friends. So I basically developed, along with others, this methodology of how do we hold these conversations around faith, around belief, around prejudice, around stereotypes, around narrative, different narratives that can coexist and don't need to be resolved, but also not allowing for harmful narratives that don't have truth or don't have a place in society, to stand. We developed a whole methodology around this. So I was going into to spaces where maybe traditionally, you might not expect a Jewish person to pop up, in like very traditional Christian or Sikh or Muslim schools, and then increasingly in businesses as well, or in local government, really facilitating conversations around identity, around faith provision, around stereotypes, and around privilege, really, although I didn't really have the language for that then, privilege and power. I then moved to corporate and did a whole bunch of work in the leadership development space, particularly developing early talent, so people who were in their first 2 years of their careers, for big corporates. The Bank of England, Clifford Chance, Accenture, Deloitte, those sorts of beasts, like these big companies where you've got these big budgets. I was like, I've been playing with paper and string in the NGO space for how long? And you've had these budgets? Oh my God. So I was like, I can work with this, but also like really appreciating, wow, there's these values that you really want to instill in people, but where is the training to back those values up with behaviors? We can only really uphold values if we're having conversations about those values. What happens when two values come into conflict with each other? How are we expecting young people straight out of college or university or whatever it might be to navigate the complexities of business life, the moral complexities, the ethical complexities, actually, is what really kind of grabbed me. So I spent 2 years kind of devising leadership stuff, but really trying to bake the values in there kind of by the back door. And I mean, in the end, I got super burnt out. I'm not going to lie. It was really intense. It was a kind of scale up situation, and it was extremely fast paced, but also I don't think particularly accepting of diversity, and there were people who kind of, I think, were really kind of a bit resistant to some of the observations I had about power dynamics in the organization. And I thought that was a problem with me, but turns out, as if you've ever pointed out something that someone didn't want pointed out and they pointed at you and said, oh no, you're the problem, you'll know what I mean when you go, maybe it's me. Maybe I'm just the big pain in the bum here. Sorry, I don't know if I can swear here. But yeah, so essentially did that. And eventually in 2017, I started to work for myself. So I developed a diversity, equity, inclusion consultancy with a business partner at the time. We did that for 4 years. It was called Trust Lab. And it was all about what are the conversations we need to have to build trust, true trust, not just trust that's imposed on us through power that looks like trust, but isn't real trust. And a lot about moving at the speed of trust, which some of you might have heard of this phrase of actually, rather than going at breakneck speed and breaking things, what would it mean to ensure that we're moving at the speed of the trust that we're building between people? And when trust gets broken, do we have to slow down and rebuild it? So it was really radical work. And then I trained as an integral coach, which is a kind of leadership coaching which takes into account the whole human, including, I find this fascinating, the body. So our bodies, are a lot of our, hormonal, cortisol, adrenaline responses that sometimes drive us when we're running on fumes and when we're in a startup life, right? I've never worked for a company with more than 25 people in it. So I know, from 3 actually to 25 people, that there's a lot that's demanded of us. And sometimes we don't even factor in how our bodies are running the show. We think it's all up here. And so I really appreciate that. And also kind of taking into account spirituality, i.e., what meaning do we give to life? What meaning do we want to give our lives and our work and our legacies, rather than just going, well, what should I do next? Randomly based on what I want to do now, but taking that longer view. So I really appreciated that that training in integral coaching. I'm a certified integral coach. And now, Michele, I run a business called Rebel Leadership with Debbie Danon. And Rebel Leadership, essentially the premise is, and I know you'll have lots to say about this, Michele, and I'm sure your listeners will too. Let's just agree that this world is not set up for us to flourish. It just isn't. That pandemic showed it in a stark relief, and we're now questioning a lot of things that we didn't have space to question before about what commitment to organizations looked like, who holds the power there, working from home, which disabled folks and people with caring responsibilities have been advocating for years and years, and suddenly it's a norm. There's a lot of stuff is shifting around. Oh gosh, you know what, we've been putting up with some stuff that is not helping us flourish for a long time, and the conversations around race and around like ongoing systemic inequality and injustice that's not been addressed. So how do we start to first of all name it and go, this is not conducive to productivity, flourishing, efficacy, legacy. Like a lot of this stuff needs to be dismantled. And the first place it has to be dismantled is in here. It has to be us recognizing the beliefs that we've internalized, what I call hisses or harmful internalized standards and stories that have us scrambling around to perform, to appear to kind of meet these standards that like maybe we didn't really want to subscribe to in the first place. So Rebel Leadership has 3 strands, if you like, and we're going to hang out in probably a little bit of all 3, but really the last one I think is where we're going to hang out today. Rebel Authenticity, Rebel Balance, and Rebel Courage, ABC. So Rebel Authenticity is about, in a world that tells us that we have to be as proximate to power as we can. So like as women, we have to be more masculine, we're thinking the 80s shoulder pads. By the way, I love a shoulder pad. I have narrow shoulders. I'm not dissing the shoulder pads. I have many, but, doing it in the spirit of, this is me versus I'm trying to be someone else. I'm trying to channel something that I'm not. There's a great difference in that. So Rebel Authenticity is about embracing your strengths, not trying to be all things to all people, but really knowing your strengths, managing your strengths so they don't become weaknesses, recognizing your power and your privilege and different situations and how to manage that. And also dealing with your inner critic, that voice that's kind of trying to keep you safe and small. So that's kind of the realm of Rebel Authenticity. Rebel Balance is about resisting the pervasive narratives of hustle culture and of productivity porn, this kind of endless drive for muchos efficiency when you're like, oh, I actually can't think straight anymore. Like, I'm so exhausted. Why am I tired? When clients come to me and they're like, Debbie, why am I tired? And I'm like, I don't know, let's talk about it. Like, how much stuff are you holding? And we can't even cover all the stuff that they're holding in 1 hour. So Rebel Balance is about cultivating the practices, the self-care and the community care that you need to resource yourself. A lot of Rebel Balance is about recognizing your own needs, setting boundaries and maintaining those boundaries. That's the hard part. And also making requests of other people, clear requests of other people, and holding them to account, or at least, staying in conversation with them about those requests in order to have them met. So you can borrow their capacity to fulfill your needs. So that's Rebel Balance. And then Rebel Courage, which is about doing the right thing, even when it's the hard thing. And what does the right thing mean, Michele? For me, Rebel Courage is really about how do I become an advocate and an ally for the commitments that I stand by in the world. If I am a commitment for, people first in my organization that I'm building, right? I'm building a startup. I don't have to live within the kind of big corporate norms that, have been established in bigger companies that are harder to undo. I can define the culture. Well, then, how are you going to make sure you follow through on that? And that sometimes involves vulnerability, of humility, being right-sized and admitting, I don't actually know, I don't have all the answers, which is hard in startup world because we're having to constantly convince investors, these people, that people, possible partners, customers, clients, that we know, and then they can have their confidence in us. And yet we have to have that space for not knowing, for exploring, for emergence, and for having difficult conversations rather than succumbing to avoidance or what happened to me, which is you're the problem, don't tell me that, you're the problem, I'm perfectly fine, really having that self-reflection and that accountability. And I think we'll talk more about accountability today. So really, all of these experiences have really fed into my Rebel Leadership Framework. And now I support mission-driven businesses to develop cultures of flourishing for all through developing leadership, which is, taking responsibility for yourself and the people around you. So yeah, that's really a little bit about me and the work that I do.
Well, I love how you perfectly set us up to have a conversation about difficult conversations, because you and I both talked about this. Even senior leaders are challenged by difficult conversations. So you can imagine a startup founder in their first, maybe even their second startup business. There's a lot there for them to learn about, not just how to lead the vision and the solution that they're bringing to the world, how to lead the people in the team so that they all are able to work together. That opens the door for the fact that difficult conversations need to happen. And so many times what I notice is you've got one of two camps. You've got people who think they're going to organically deal with it, which usually means avoid it. Or people will take the stance of, well, this is how it's going to be. And they kind of bring that top-down authoritative structure they've seen either through experience in the corporate world or through mentorship from people in the corporate world who think they're advising startup founders. And that doesn't really help them have good, difficult conversations. And those conversations can look like anything from when people are not agreeing, but they're having to work together, all the way to they've been working really hard to make a specific kind of growth happen. But you and I both know that once they get to that level of growth, it's a whole different game. And if they haven't had the difficult conversations in that journey, usually there's lots of fallout. So because we like to do things from a practical perspective, what would you say to startup founders who are listening to us today to kind of put us all on the same playing field, start with the same foundational thought of, I'm the startup founder, I have to lead us with vision, but I also recognize it's my responsibility to lead us, which means sometimes I'm going to have difficult conversations. One of the things that I need to keep in mind to recognize when difficult conversations surface, because I think that's a great starting point.
Yes, I totally agree. So I like this idea of an equal foundation, or a nice starting ground. So how about this for a starter, Michele? My assessment is that startup founders and people who are growing senior leadership who are growing startups actually are very well placed in their skill set, potentially. I think I've seen it in my clients too, to hold difficult conversations if they see them in this way. And this way is, to be a startup founder, you have to be comfortable with emergence. You don't have that huge runway of, that you can pay people's salaries for X number of years. Like you maybe have 6 months at a run, right? Like, or you're thinking about who the next hire is going to be, and that's a hugely high stakes situation. And something else comes in from left field and it derails your plans and you have to adapt. Startup folks are highly adaptable. They are used to navigating the emergent. Sometimes it's painful, but they have a much higher tolerance for it sometimes than people in larger organizations that can kind of almost, the organization itself can take some of the impact of some of those curveballs. And I also think it takes a lot of courage to be like, we're going to disrupt something. We're going to create this new product, this new service. We're going to disrupt an industry. We're going to say something about the state of the world with our organization. So I want to start, I take a strengths-based approach in all of my coaching. And I think it's really important to know what pain palette you're working with. And I think broadly, the startup folks that I've worked with, both when I was in a team and as clients, have had these characteristics, even within the team, even if not every person has all of these things. There's adaptability, there's comfortability with emergence, there's the ability to make decisions informed by, vision, rather than just necessity, keep balancing vision and necessity, and there's courage. So I really want to start, Michele, I wonder whether you want to say something before I kind of carry on about this. I wonder if you have any thoughts. I think that startup founders actually do have a lot of the raw materials of the skills, the building blocks that they need. It's just that they haven't maybe had practice at employing them in this particular context.
I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. They haven't had as much practice at deploying it. And we all know that the more we do things, that gives us a whole different level of confidence in being able to fulfill them, because, it shows up differently each time it surfaces, which allows us to pull back a bit of the onion there, gain some confidence, or learn something new from a different perspective that allows us to feel a whole another level of confidence as we're growing forward, especially when you're in a space where you're disrupting what's norm already. Ooh, that made me think and wonder, Debbie, what happens to startup founders who are used to navigating the waters of disruption, and difficult conversations just look like, oh, damn, one more thing.
Yeah, I think that's a completely, I think that's the same for all of us. We're like, oh, I really didn't need this, because sometimes that's a great thing to notice, is that sometimes difficult conversations that arise are about, they can feel like a disruption to where we're going, or they can feel like it's somebody else's agenda that's disrupting our agenda, that's interrupting our agenda, right? So historically, when I at this company, when I brought an observation that my manager had said some things about what it meant to be a real man in front of a young femme man in our company, and I just made him aware that we had a one-to-one, and in private, I said, look, he said, do you have any feedback for me? And I said, yeah, actually, there's just one thing, when we were in the pub, I just noticed that this made this young man uncomfortable. I could see that, I think we have to be a bit careful about terms like real man, or like defining what masculinity really is, because, he's as much, if he identifies as a man, he's as much a man as anyone else. But I got the feeling that he was really uncomfortable, and he left shortly after that conversation. So I just wanted to make you aware. And, what I got was a whole ton of defensiveness, because I think what he was prepared for, maybe I could have prepared him a little better, whatever. But the fact is, what he experienced from that, I imagine, was, this is a waste, that this is not what I want to talk about right now. Like, I don't want to have to kind of consider my behavior. I don't see myself as a bad person. So this either Debbie is saying I'm a bad person and that's wrong, or, I'm being made to take responsibility for something I haven't done. Like, I think he just experienced it as this, oh, are you kidding me? And what then happened was I got made into the problem. But I can see the way in which, with empathy, with time, and with forgiveness, I think all of us can have those moments where we're like, oh man, really, we have to have this conversation about, negotiating pay, or about harmful behaviors that are happening, or whatever. And you're like, this feels like a distraction from the mission. But here's the thing. That incident directly led to me departing from the company. And how much did that cost the company in the end, in terms of replacing me, in terms of blah, 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 blah. So there's way, and also, in terms of your reputation as an organization, there's people who came to me and said, I'd love to apply for this organization. I was like, you know what, like, if you value your sanity, maybe not. So there's something too, I think, Michele, about maybe this is a kind of a way to summarize it, is difficult conversations are difficult because they matter, not because they don't matter. Like, they wouldn't be difficult if they were inconsequential, if they didn't have stakes. They're difficult because you feel the stakes are high, that you could lose an employee over it, or that, that there could be a court case at the, I don't know, like we can actually start to imagine what the stakes of something might be, the emotional stakes too, of like, this might hurt, right? And actually, I want to posit, and there's a fabulous book which we can link to in the show notes called Difficult Conversations: How to Discuss What Really Matters, and it's by Harvard professional negotiators. And what I love about that book is it really goes to the heart of this stuff matters. That's why we have to talk about it. And pretending that it doesn't matter only kicks the can down the road and causes more problems later, which is what you said about if we don't have them early, those conversations are only going to bite us later.
Yes. Oh, I love how you summed that up. And I love how it's giving us an opportunity to start checking in with our own inner chatter. You know, it's like, why do I feel or sense this is preventing us from our mission? Is it really preventing us from our mission, or is my resistance to addressing it preventing us from our mission? This is why I tell leaders all the time, as much as you think you are an expert at making decisions, I bet we could actually start peeling back some layers and discover you have an opportunity to level up your questions. Because if you aren't asking good enough questions, then you're not going to be able to address difficult conversations. And sometimes it's literally a matter of asking a better question.
I love that. I love that. And something I like to say to my clients, maybe this connects, is before good decisions come good admissions, which is like, we got to admit some stuff to ourselves, like sunk cost bias. Sometimes we're like, oh, I've gone this far. I don't really want to have to turn now. Like we've come this far. But sometimes we know in the startup world, like we've come this far, but actually it's going to cost us a lot more if we just keep going, that extra 20%. We just got to cut our losses at that point. That's always a painful decision to make. But before that decision comes an admission that, hang on, we made a mistake. And, you know, our egos take a hit and we can be bruised a little bit from it. We need to lick our wounds. But before that big decision has to come an admission. So I wonder if that's part of it, Michele, is like, you know, senior leaders hold so much on their shoulders, and it can feel like just another burden. But maybe the problem too is the phrasing of difficult conversations. And it's one of those things like resilience that kind of gets packaged in the world as like, it's the thing that people know what you're talking about. It's like the label on it. But even by calling it difficult, are we making it more difficult than it is? Like, can we get more specific? Is it uncomfortable conversations? Because discomfort isn't a bad thing. Startup folks know that more than anyone. Discomfort can be like exhilarating sometimes, and it can be a sign that you're on the right track because you're tapping into aliveness and what matters. Maybe we need to call them, I don't know, like disclosive conversations, where it's like, I'm actually telling you what matters to me and you're actually telling me what matters to you. I don't know, or conversations of emergence. Just even, you know, words matter. So even framing them as difficult, I want to challenge the folks at home to really think, what would I call it instead? Is it like, what prickly conversations, but like finding a way to say it that it's a bit more specific than just difficult, which can be like, I don't like difficult stuff, let me keep it out here. What would help us to welcome it in a little more?
You know, it's interesting because this is reminding me of conversations I saw on LinkedIn this morning. And so many times people don't want to take responsibility for putting new names or new labels on things. And sometimes you can put such a progressive name and label on something that it hasn't had an opportunity to bridge across yet, that yes, people misunderstand. So I wonder, instead of giving it a new name, what if it's more about our willingness to ask the next question?
Love that.
So in difficult conversations, what's really hard about this? Is it because I'm feeling threatened? Is it because I'm worried I'm going to be asked to do something I don't have the skill or the quality to do? You know, does this threaten my personal identity? Does this threaten our ability to acquire a client? I mean, it goes back to establishing a new set of skills as a leader.
Yeah. And I love this, Michele, because when we ask ourselves a question, we get one set of answers. But when we ask a trusted advisor, a whole other bunch of questions come up. So whether it's a colleague, whether it's a coach, whether it's someone like you know, like in this conversation, I'm getting so much more out of this than if I was just broadcasting live, right? Because I'm bouncing off what you say. So even like there's a certain amount of reflection we can do on our own to build that competency of like, I'm going to ask myself these questions. What questions am I asking as a result of this conversation being brought to me? And then, and I do a lot of this in my Rebel Courage sessions, is we do group coaching on upcoming conversations that might be difficult for us. And actually, it's amazing to see some things that are difficult for some people. First of all, there's a certain commonality, like everyone's like, yeah, that sounds uncomfortable, emotional stakes, da, da, da. But also sometimes people are like, you know, actually, I don't mind talking about money. Let me help you. I'm actually quite cool about that. Or I've dealt with this before with, you know, performance management situation. And I dealt with it like this. And actually, I feel pretty good about that. I feel like that's less difficult for me because we're at different levels with our practice. So there's something really powerful with questions that you bring about getting into conversation with people that you trust, and having a space to take those questions rather than just having them be something that kind of just buzzes around like a mosquito and bothers you.
Oh my gosh. So my brain is like just having a blast with our conversation. And one of the things that I don't always talk about, but I'm going to bring it up because it's happening and I think it's beneficial. So I love how you talked about how when we're willing to have difficult conversations and ask a new set of questions, it allows our team members to actually step forward where they have experience and then help the entire group. If we're not willing to have those conversations, then those interactions never happen. We are running a tad close on our time. And so I'm wondering, how can we use this last 5 minutes to not just summarize, because I mean, you know, it's a 30-minute conversation. How hard is that for them to do that in their head? But what are some practical things that we could offer listeners today? You know, maybe a 1, 2, 3 kind of thing, as well as how about you and I have to do something, and that is, what might a future difficult conversation look like? I think that would be a fascinating question to explore. Which one would you like to take first?
All right. I'll take the little thing that people can take away to really start getting into this. So since you brought up questions and how we can start to question some of the premise of why something's difficult and get under the skin of it, rather than have our first reaction, whether it's in our gut or our throat or our head, like, oh, like, I don't want to do this. So a great thing to ask yourself, and I take this again from the book Difficult Conversations, I use it with clients all the time, is there are 3 big human fears that get triggered when a difficult conversation comes on the horizon. One is, what if I'm not competent? One is, what if I'm not a good person? And the third one is, what if I'm not worthy of love? So, or of respect, or whatever you want to call it. Like, but I think love is a good word here. So what you could do next time you have a difficult conversation, you could be like, okay, does the difficulty come from, this is questioning my competence, and that's an ego thing, right? It's all ego stuff. Is this questioning whether I've done my job right? And actually, is that accurate? Like, actually, maybe that's a judgment I'm putting on myself. 2 is, am I a good person? And actually, hello, we're all just people. There is no such thing. You don't get a badge one day that says you've unlocked good person status. Like, you've unlocked top leader status. You never get that. Even doing my Rebel Leadership course, I'm never going to give you that little badge that says now you're a Rebel leader, because it's a practice, folks. And we cause harm all the time, inadvertently, unexpectedly. So it's not about whether you're a good person and whether you're perfect. It's about whether you're willing to take responsibility. So that's a nice way in with, am I a good person? And finally, am I worthy of love? And the truth is, you know, we're all worthy of that. And we have to kind of maybe surround ourselves with people who really do love and respect us, but also who will tell us the truth. And for that not to be too, like, the trouble, obviously, with, we see this with like billionaires, with like, with folks who have power, surround themselves with the yes people. And it's like, actually, what if we don't equate people telling us the truth with, am I worthy of, like, we don't say those two things need to be different. People who love us and can tell us the truth. And just because someone tells us something we don't like doesn't mean we're not worthy of love. So I think those are 3 great starting points to start dismantling your own resistance, your own ego response to a difficult conversation. And it can help you choose who you want to be in that conversation, how to facilitate and trust the emergence. So maybe the last thing I'll say in response to your last question is, what would a future difficult conversation look like? For me, it's all about trust and emergence. It's about building on the trust that you already have. I think it's about trust, emergence, and what really matters. So trust is what is building on the trust that you have, and with the goal of leaving the space with trust not irreparably damaged. I think a future conversation could look like trusting emergence, which is not going in with your set thing of, this is what I want to achieve in this conversation, because otherwise it's not a conversation, it's a mandate, like you said, authoritarian. So how can we trust that even if things are said that we don't agree with or that bring up reactions for us, how can we build our capacity to stay in the conversation and trust the emergence of what's going to happen? Because if we stop halfway through and we go, that's it, throw everything down and run, we haven't seen the conversation through, and maybe something is better, more refreshing is on the other side. And then, yeah, just like recognizing the stakes of what matters, like naming why this conversation matters to you and to them, and have, maybe if those things are different, having them just be alongside each other and being explicit about that. And I just want to say, just by way of closing, Michele, like, I have enormous faith. I see leaders all the time try this stuff out and get it wrong, and then learn, and then get it right, and then get it wrong again. But it's a practice. It has to be something that we practice. It's not something that we're like, great, I got the course, I did the course on this and now I can do it. Life will keep surprising us. So it's really a practice of being in conversation with life, which is difficult. Maybe that's the way I'll end today.
Really appreciate that. And as I was listening to you, I found the future difficult conversation that surfaced in my mind as I was listening to all the things that you were sharing, especially since it's something that's a topic where a lot of us are exploring it, is, what does a difficult conversation look like between humans and AI?
Ooh.
That's definitely a future conversation.
Yes. Oh, wow. Yes. That's a whole other podcast. Let's do this again. I'll go have a chat with ChatGPT, and we'll stir up some stuff on some controversial issues, and I'll come back to you.
That is. And so I want to close with reminding everybody, you have ways to connect with Debbie. It's in the event pages. So you can connect with her on LinkedIn. You can go check out what she does inside of her leadership space in the UK, bring her to Europe, bring her to the United States, wherever you'd like to work with her. And of course, we want to always invite you to come back and get to know us and have conversations with us here at Startup Grind Houston. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. And you're always welcome to email me and say, hey, Michele, can you bring this topic or this person on? And let's hear that conversation. So thanks for tuning in today, and we will talk to you next month.